So hello everyone and welcome to our webinar on getting started with API security testing from basic to practical attacks. I'm Nandini Bharadwaj, the operating officer at CyberWarfare Labs and the host for today's session. It's fantastic to have you all here with us today. So let's get started. So we are CW Labs, a global infosec company shaping the future of cybersecurity learning with a presence across UK, US, and India. Our mission is simple: make cybersecurity practical and accessible. We do this through our two powerful division, that is niche cyber range labs. It consists of real world hands on cyber exercises. And number second is continuous learning by Infinity Learning Platform, a continuous learning hub built for cyber modern pros. Additionally, CWL provide customized on-site training for organization and accept bulk order for corporate upscaling. For inquiries or for more detail, feel free to reach out at support@cyberwarfare.live. So, yeah, I think we can now move forward. Okay. So, let me introduce to our speaker of today's session, that is Abhijit Kumar. So, Abhijit is a security researcher with an expertise in red team operations, network security, cloud infrastructure, and Linux system. He is also passionate about researching adversarial tactics, techniques, and procedure, and frequently experiments in his home lab. So, we are excited to hear his insights for today's session. So, that's all about the speaker. And dear participants, as promised, we are excited to share that you will receive your attendance certificate within next 48 hours along with the video recording of the webinar. So, thank you for being part of this continuous learning, and we look forward for your continuous participation. So without further ado, I would like Abhijit to take over and let's get started.
Okay, all right. So here we are going to talk a bit about the APIs, how they are constructed, and how we can exploit. So to begin with, APIs is something of a very interesting topic because almost every day, like literally every day, we interact with these APIs. But for most of the cases, we do not exactly know that we're interacting. So think of a scenario, and we take a very good analogy. So we all go to the restaurants. Now in the restaurants, whenever we're ordering, so we sit at the front end. That is, we sit at the tables, we order something, and then the back end, that is the chefs, they cook our meals. But there is one interesting thing, that is the waiters. So essentially, what they do is they take our orders, they relay it to the back end, that is the chefs. Once chefs prepare the meal, these waiters take the meal and deliver it to us. And this is literally what API is. So essentially, it stands for Application Programming Interface, and it allows two different systems to communicate with each other. And in this process, some data is shared, and there are certain formats for that, which we'll look into it a bit. So, talking about the typical API architecture in an enterprise. So, we have different constraints when talking about the enterprise architectures. So we will be having some internal users and we'll also be having some external users. That is the guest or the customers. Then the employees will be the internal. So for this, we have some API gateways. We have one external API gateway here, and we have one internal API gateway. For the external, we have some consumers who are interacting with this external API gateway. And what this API gateway is doing is it has certain routes. Routes are nothing but locations to certain programming interfaces or programming methods. And once these consumers hit those routes, they are gonna pass from the external gateway to the CDN, that is the content delivery networks, such as the Cloudflare, Akamai, and all the others. And from there, they have different content that is cached. So if they're hitting any endpoint which is whose data is cached, it will be returned here. Otherwise, it will be passed to the backend. Now, some exceptions to these methods are there are certain scenarios where we actually allow certain routes to be exposed without any APIs. Like, no API gateway, just you can hit it directly in certain cases. And for that, we have some direct channels. And these type channels could be, let's say, for talking about some of our external beacons. So let's say we're hosting a SIM or XDR, and we don't want to go the API route. So we can configure some other authentication operation mechanisms and certain other maybe proprietary channels or certain other channels, and we can route the traffic of these specific things from there. But once that is done, it will hit the internal API gateway instead of hitting the external. And from here, this was for the external scenario. From here, we have the internal users. They are hitting this internal API gateway directly. And from there, whatever request is coming from this or this, and even in this case, if the CDN doesn't have the cached one, so this request will again be passed and it will make a request to the gateway. And in the backend, we have a lot of these containers, these Kubernetes, these virtual machines, and all the other stuff. Now, moving ahead. So, there are multiple API protocols that we actually use on a regular basis, or the API protocols which are used most commonly. And one of this is the REST. REST stands for Representational State Transfer, and it is a HTTP based API. So if we are interacting with any of the web URLs, so we might be using different HTTP methods or verbs, such as we can use the get to get any content, post or put to write anything, that is updating any content, delete to delete any data, and so on and so on. So all of these things apply here. And it is essentially very similar to this HTTP. And with the rest, we have the options of using multiple. We can use the JSON, we can use YAML, we can use normal HTML. Like it is flexible. However, its counterpart that is the so simple object access protocol. It is a very strict protocol. So previously we saw that with this REST, it based on the HTTP API and it supports all the HTTP verbs and it supports different methods. Like we can use let's say application JSON as the content type. You can use application YAML, application HTML, or whatnot, or even XML. However, for this, so it is XML based, and it is one very interesting thing that is it has a very strict schema validation. So whatever schema we are setting, it should match exactly. And again, it supports multiple protocol as compared to REST, which supports only HTTP mostly, and this supports like HTTP, SMTP, and TCP. Just talking about a bit of difference about the REST and the SOAP. So REST is used for multiple purposes. Like we can use REST in the banking, we can use REST in the let's say e-commerce, or if we are writing some offensive tools and we want to expose some APIs, we can use REST to create the APIs for that. Although SOAP is very specific, very schema driven, and it is one of the API protocols which are mostly used in the banking and high risk sectors. Moving from here, talking about the API risk. So this I actually want to just have one sort of open conversation. So just write in the chat. I think you guys have access to the chat. So just write in the chat or raise your hand and basically just I want to see if you guys have any idea about what sort of risk would be for the APIs. Like we all know for the web applications, we have the injections and we can do SQLite, we can do SSRF and all these attacks. Any clue about what attacks we can do on the APIs? Feel free to write in the chat. So most of the attacks actually that we can do against the web applications, it also applies to the APIs. Because in the end, whatever requests we are creating or passing through these APIs, essentially in one way or the other, they land in one or the other web application. So most of these attacks will be very much valid for the APIs. And one of the things I personally have encountered a lot against the APIs is most of these APIs they have the misconfigured authentication authorizations. So it's not very strictly driven. So for example, if there's one API and if I'm one authenticated user, that is, I have even the basic privileges of any authenticated user, I can hit certain routes. And while these routes should be protected, they often are not. And these things I usually found a lot when I'm doing some research or when I'm doing some personal projects or even for some of the company projects. I've encountered these things. Like most of these APIs, even though they are very strictly driven, they have very good documentation. Some of these routes or some of these validations are there. So I'll say key misconfiguration, the biggest misconfiguration in the APIs come from the RBAC side. That is the role-based access control. And I think 70 to 80% of the time in almost every API I have tested, I have found at least one or two of these RBAC issues. Now, moving on from here, there is a OWASP top-10 list, and those of you who are not familiar with the OWASP, so it is Open Web Application Security Project, and it compiles a top-10 list of top 10 expected vulnerabilities during a 4 period tenure. So the last list for the API they published was in 2023, and this list contains all of the attack exploitation vectors that were most commonly used by the attackers during that period, that is from 19 to 20. So, what were some of these? So, these are some of the top 10 lists from the 2023. And here we can see that we have broken object authorization. And if you check broken function authorization, improper asset management, and then we have the mass assignment, broken user authentication, lack of rate limiting. So, all of these, this BOLA, this BOFA, asset management. All of these, if you check, most of these are from the RBAC side, that is the automation operation side of it. And there's a very good reason for that because APIs are a very critical thing. And even when I'm working with the APIs, I'm writing the APIs. Often, like, I just leave some routes or some different methods open so I can test. And when I'm pushing it, and it has happened once I push something and then I recall, okay, I missed that. There was one very open feature, and if anyone could have discovered that endpoint, they could have essentially compromised the API. So these things happen. And if we compare this against the 2021, so we can see that we had this broken object level authorization, which remained on top for the last 8 years. Then we have the broken user authentication. Again, it remains the same. And then some of these, that is the excessive data exposure and mass assignment, they were merged into this broken object property level. And rest of these, they remain pretty much the same or the similar. Now, moving on to how we can identify and enumerate all of these API vulnerabilities or the misconfiguration. So, first comes the concept of the reconnaissance. So, what exactly is this reconnaissance? So, it is a method using which we identify or we gather information about any particular target. This target could be a human being, it could be one web application, API, a company, a product, or anything. Literally, it could be anything. It's just we're gathering some information about it. Now, reconnaissance, it also like comes with the different flavors. We have the active recon, we have the passive recon. In the active recon, we actually interact with the target. In the passive, we just use OSINT, that is open source interaction, to connect with the to identify the information without actually connecting with the target. Now, in case of APIs, we have multiple methods we can use, and we'll talk about a couple of these here. So the very first method is the crawling. So crawling is the automated collection of the web pages to match the site's application. Now, what this means? So let's say we have one web application or one API, and it has multiple web pages. Let's say it's example.com slash API slash v1. Then slash we have the users. Inside the users, we could have user info, user login. Then we can have the auth route, that is API v1 auth. We can have the API v1 products, API v1 orders, and whatnot. So using this crawling, we actually interact with this web application on the API. We do the spying, that is, we go through all of the things we find. Let's say key, we're testing this, and we found that there is one API v1. So from API v1, we will be using some word list. And from there, let's say we hit API v1, and our word list has, let's say, five keywords. Let's say it's users, login, auth, orders, and products. So let's say for users and logins, we got the hit. For the others, that is the product and whatnot, we didn't got any hit. Now we have two valid routes, that is the API v1 users, API v1 login. We started enumerating further, and inside this API v1 login, we didn't find anything, but Inside this API V1 users, we found profile. Now inside the profile, we could have something, let's say forget password routes. We can have, let's say, set picture or set email, reset password and more. So this is the problem. And some of the places we can look for the interesting routes, interesting methods, or interesting parameters is the directories, obviously. Then there's a sitemap file. In most of the cases, you'll find it at the root directory sitemap.xml. And then there is the robots.txt. So these three are very interesting places to look when you're crawling. And essentially by enumerating, you can build a very good word list. And there are actually very good word lists available out there, which you can use to enumerate the APIs that you found or any web application that you found. Now, moving on from the crawling, the next enumeration recon concept we have is the fuzzing. And essentially, fuzzing means if we have found any endpoint, we are giving that endpoint a very unexpected inputs. That is, let's say, okay, is it okay? I can see some questions not audible. So, just confirming I am audible, right? Can anyone confirm if I am still audible? I see some messages saying that not audible. Okay, all right. So, I think most of the people can hear me. So, if you're not able to hear me, I recommend you end the webinar and you rejoin and maybe check your mouse, maybe check your mic. If you're using some headphones and stuff, it could happen that some mismatch could be there. Okay, now moving on from this. So, talking about the fuzzing. Okay, so let's say we have one endpoint, and that endpoint is, let's say, API v1 auth. Now this auth endpoint, let's say it is supporting only Git, and in the Git it has a URL parameter. It is taking the, let's say, API v1 auth question mark username equals to something, ampersand password equals to something. It is taking this parameter. Now we can try fuzzing this. Let's say it is taking username and password. We can maybe try to add one more parameter, that is admin equals to true. Or maybe if it is taking get request, we can try sending post request. Or maybe we can remove all the parameters, try to use SQLi or whatever. Fuzzing means we're giving unexpected input. That is like it is not expecting that input. It is expecting something else, but it is giving this. So in most of the cases, and this is actually very true if you are doing the vulnerability assessments or if you are doing like these fuzzing for finding vulnerabilities. So we have a lot of very good fuzzers out there. And if we fuzz the applications with these fuzzers, most cases we'll find sometime that application has crashed due to one of these specific errors. And from there we can go identify okay, so what actually led to this crash and how we can actually convert this thing into an exploit. It is a very tedious process, but very interesting if you are into that sort of thing. Now, coming to this API fuzzing, so these are some of the ways we can fuzz. And some of the places we can look is the query parameters. Like I said, if we have something username, password, we can add, let's say, admin, or maybe add some amount, or maybe add some other parameters. If it is the OAuth route, we can try removing these states, we can try scope changing the scopes and all of these things. Then the endpoint pattern. So let's say if there is one API and it is has certain patterns. We can use some regular expressions to give it that the specific input. Then some of the most underrated stuff would be the cookies and session IDs. So while fuzzing these, so we'll sometimes discover that there is an either or broken escalation scenarios, and we can literally abuse that to gain very good access. Now moving on from here, we have the API documentation. And these API documentation let's explain how this API can be used and almost every company that uses these APIs, they have one or more of these API documentation methods, and they publish these API documentation. Some of uh, just a second. Yeah, now talking about these API documentation. So these companies they publish. Again, some of the things they can use is they can use CyberWarfare, or they can have their own publishing things. For example, if you're familiar with the Microsoft APIs, so they publish those on their own website as the collection. Then we have a tool named as Postman, and most of the companies they publish these Postman collections. So these are some of the ways we can actually interact with these API documentations. Now, how do we actually enumerate, find vulnerabilities, and exploit these? So for these, we can use some of the tools, and some of the most common tools we discuss. And the very first one is the box. So this box suite is a set of like web application tools, and it is developed by a company called ToolSuite. And some of the core tools that Bob has are the proxy, repeater, intruder, scanner, collaborator, and extender. Now, two of these, that is the scanner and collaborator. So they are actually part of the Bob Suite Professional, which is a paid version costing around €500. However, this community edition is free and it contains all of the other tools that we discussed, that is proxy, repeater, intruder, and extender. So we'll talk a bit about these. So proxy is something we use to capture traffic with. So proxy is something we use to capture traffic between different application and a browser. It acts as a man in the middle. Repeater is the tool which we can use to repeat or send the variation of a different request. For example, let's say talking about that example when we were modifying the parameters during the first set. So we can capture that request, send it to the repeater, and from there we can essentially use it. We can modify the parameters and we can send multiple requests like that. Intruder is one of the tools we can use to perform the brute forcing. And then extender is just sort of the extensions. So using this extender, we can use either the extensions which are already present in the Bosuit's tool, that is apps tool, or we can write our own extensions and use it with the extender. Now, scanner and collaborator. So scanner, it has very good checks and it checks for the vulnerabilities automatically. And then we have the collaborator. It is used for checking the scenarios where we have the blind interactions. For example, if we are checking for the blind SSRFs or blind SQLs, it will give us some HTTP or DNS endpoints, and we can use it to send a request from the backend. If we receive a request from the backend, that means there's some blind SRF or blind SQL things going on. Next tool we look into is the Postman. And Postman, essentially, it is not a pen testing tool per se, but it is used in the pen testing scenarios. And the reason is because this Postman, it has a wholesome environment for creating and testing the APIs. And it supports almost all of the API protocols, be it the REST, SOAP, GraphQL, many other protocols. And it also has some good tools which allows us to inspect the HTTP responses. Additionally, one of the things I really like about Postman is I can use it as a proxy. So let's say if I have a Postman collection, I can use that to send a request and I can configure a proxy. Essentially, I can put the Bob suit as a proxy for the Postman and from there the traffic will flow. So I can analyze the request quite well in the Bob suite and from there I can send it to different other tools and perform different other operations. Now, these two are for the interaction with the APIs. However, we talked about the fuzzing and crawling and analysis. So, for the fuzzing, I really love this one, and this is FOSS. It stands for First Faster You Fool. And it is a very good tool for the fuzzing, and it is literally very fast. Like, there are other tools out there. There have been tools for like 15, 20 years, and they're still used, and it is quite well. But this tool I really like just because it is quite fast and it has a lot of different options which you can use. So using this, so we'll see how we can use FOF to interact. And then we have the nuclei. And nuclei is one of the very good vulnerability scanners. And again, I use nuclei very well and quite a lot. And just because it has a template system, so it has a nuclei engine, and this engine supports YAML-based templates. And there are a lot of community templates out there. And the part I really like is I can write my own templates and I can use those to scan. I need not like publish those templates if I do not want to. And I have a lot of very good templates I have written over the years, and they help me with the animation and exploitation very well. And this is something I would highly recommend if you are into the web applications or the APIs, or if you're doing some security research and you want to do research at scale. These are some of the tools you should actually learn or interact or at least understand, because even if you are the guy who is like writing their own tools, just understand how this nuclear or how these other tools are doing the operations. And these will help you when you're taking those resources to the scale. Because scanning one, two, or five, 10 targets, it is like manually, or we can write some scripts. But talking about a scale of like thousand or hundreds of thousand IPs, hundreds of thousands of hosts, it takes a lot of effort if we are doing that manually. But if we have some of the automation like this and we have our own scanning methods, we can do that with our. So with this, this is the demo, right? So I'm really nervous because I have not used this web application that I'm going to test in a while. So we'll see how this will be. So I'm just gonna pull the web application here, and can you guys confirm if we are able to see this view that is this automobile API. So this is one of those API documentation platforms I was talking about. This is Java, and this is a vulnerable API that we have created. And you can see that we have different routes. Inside the APIs, we have the authentication route. We have all of these different methods. And you can see that some of them are taking the post, some of them get, some of them put. And if we open any of these, we can see like how they're taking parameters, how the example value is taken. If we do this basic login, we can see that we have some headers, how the output will come, what is the expected response, and all of these details. Now, if we want to scan this, now I talked about the FUF, and we see first how it actually has all of these different options. So it is available on the GitHub. You can download it as a binary or you can compile it if you want. And here you can see like we have different options. We can use different headers, different HTTP methods. We can even inject the cookies, and we can also have different protocols. Like some of organizations have moved to HTTP 3, but some of these APIs or these web applications they still fall back to one HTTP 1 or HTTP 2. So we can use that. We have some other options like we can customize our outputs, and we can have some matching functions. Like let's say if we want to match a specific error code. For example, let's say we want to match to a let's say we want to match to HTTP host that is 200 or 403. So we can configure it like that, and it will match all of these accordingly. Then we have the nuclear. And this is the first time running nuclear in this one, so it's gonna take a bit. So India is also like a very similar. We just give it a target, and can specify what sort of templates you want to use, and based on that, it will execute and it will perform these scans against these. Now, I want to show you Postman as well, and I'll show you how the collections actually look like. So we leave the nuclei as is, and you can try this later because we are already out of the time. So I'll adapt this up rather quick, and I'll take questions. So this is the Postman. So here you can see that this is the Postman. We have one collection here. Inside this collection, we have some routes. We have a Get homepage, and then we have the admin routes, AI tools, APIs, all of these different things that we have. It is present here. We can hit, let's say, any of these. Let's say we want to hit this. So, and we just need to send this. And this is what happens, folks, when you just open a VM randomly after a while and expect it to work. So here I run this particular URL with this GET request, and here we have all of these different output that key. So with this, I'll just quickly go back to the slides. So now, if you guys have any questions, you can ask. So yeah. Okay, all right. So looks like we're not having any questions. So if anyone is still like writing the question, please raise the hand, or else we can conclude the webinar. So please let me know if we're not getting any hand raises. So we'll end the webinar. Okay, all right. So we'll end the webinar, and this webinar is just introduction to one. We have released one course, that is the API RTM, API Red Team Analyst. You can check our website, and it is on the discount right now. So feel free to check it out. Thanks for joining the webinar. So thanks guys for joining, and have a great week.